Hey, Restore the Glory listeners, it's Jake. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know about a few things that are coming up that you might be interested in. First of all, I have created a course on identity, and I wanted to let you know about it because you might want to participate. Registration for the course will open early January 2024, and the course starts in middle of February. You can go to liferestoration.ca/courses and find out about it. This course is going to be one of 3 of a larger curriculum that I'm developing on human formation. The first course will be on relationship, the second one on identity, and the third on mission. So this course on identity is all about rediscovering our God-given identity. We will be walking through the Gospel of Luke, and we'll be with Jesus as his human identity is being realized in himself, and we're learning from him how to realize and discover our own identity. So it's a 9-part course, and that's divided into 3 sections. So the first section will have 3 classes, the second 3, and then the third 3. And it's something that you can do at your own pace in the sense of the first 3 classes, you can do it, then take a break, and then we'll offer it later on. But I just wanted to let you know about it. We've done 2 pilots of it before with various groups and have gotten some amazing feedback. And so I think this could be really an awesome blessing to you. So check that out, liferestoration.ca/courses, and you'll see more information there. You can sign up for our newsletter. That's probably the easiest way to get further information about the identity course. Also, I wanted to tell you about 2 pilgrimages that Heather and I are doing with Franciscan University. So Heather, my wife, does the Abiding Together podcast with Sister and Michelle. So you can go to faithandreason.com/pilgrimages. That's Franciscans kind of ministry that they do, Faith and Reason. And the first pilgrimage is to France. I've never been to France. I'm looking forward to going. This is May 11th to May 20th. And we're going to explore some of the beautiful Catholic shrines in France and experience the healing the Lord has for us in these holy places. Heather, myself, Father Nathan, who's a TOR from Franciscan University, he will be going with us. And we just wanted to let you know it's an opportunity to spend some time with us and to experience all that the Lord has for us in France, particularly focused on healing. The second pilgrimage that we're going to do is August 6th to 13th. This is a pilgrimage to Alaska. I've heard this cruise is amazing. This one will be with Heather, myself, and our good friend, Father Dave Pavanka, who is the president of Franciscan. So we're going to go on an inspiring journey through Alaska and experience all that God has for us, not only in creation, but also in our faith. There'll be talks and reflections while we're on the cruise and time to be with the Lord and each other and experience absolute gorgeous mountains and beauty in Alaska. So you can check all of that out, faithandreason.com/pilgrimages. Again, the identity course is liferestoration.ca/courses. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll get all the information there. Thanks so much. Hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're 2 Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. Hey, Bob. Good to see you for a second time this morning. So listeners, oh man, we just had 20 minutes, I think, or I don't even know how long it was, of an amazing conversation with our guest. And guess what? I didn't hit record. That's pretty important to this whole podcast thing. Wow. So we had a great conversation to ourselves. So we're going to have to start this over again. So thank you both for your patience with that. In my mind, that conversation just transformed the world, but it was just for the 3 of us and no one else.
Yeah, I know. I was so excited for everybody to
hear that anymore. Oh boy. Okay. So we have a special guest with us, Bob, Nicole Rodriguez, who's with us and is a longtime friend and spiritual child of yours. That was kind of the conversation that we just went into that was missed. Yeah. So why don't you introduce Nicole to us again, or I guess for everybody now, not just for me and you, and then we'll get into more of her story.
Yeah, it's a joy to have Nicole on. Been walking with her and her husband Lance for a long time. She's spiritual daughter for many years. She's also the godmother. Her and Lance are godparents of my second youngest godchild. Nicole is also one of the presenters for our Women's Undone team with my daughter Carrie, and Melissa and Colleen and Danielle. So it's awesome to have this conversation. We have walked through a lot of this story together over the years. And so I'm just really looking forward to everybody hearing the incredible healing, the depth of anguish that Nicole has walked through in her healing for divorce, but the beautiful healing that the Lord has done in her heart and in her marriage. If it's okay to say, when I first met Nicole, her and Lance were really in a struggling place in their marriage, and divorce was not out of the option at that point. And so much of her own woundedness was playing over into the marriage.
Nicole, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much. Bob and I are used to you. We're very comfortable with you. And we had an amazing conversation there that was about spiritual parenting and spiritual children. And that's what we missed. So listeners, we're going to do a series on this whole concept of spiritual children, and we'll have Lance, Nicole's husband, and Nicole back on to be guests on that series. It's something that, Nicole, I know for you and for me have been absolutely life transforming. So just a little teaser there that series will be amazing. And maybe we'll have on some spiritual parents and the whole thing. Like, that'd be wild to have the spiritual children, spiritual parents, the whole bit, everybody on. But to maybe step deeper into it, you, Nicole, have a lot of spiritual children. In other words, deep, deep bonds with people where you kind of offer the love of God to them in ways that maybe their parents can't or didn't or whatever. And you were mentioning this morning that you were having a conversation with two of your spiritual children who are married, who come from divorced family. And I thought you set it up really well. So maybe you can tell us that story, and then I'd love to hear about your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was mentioning two of our children who are married, Christian and Susan, spiritual children. They're with us this morning, and we were just talking and praying together. And they were mentioning to my husband and I what a gift it is to have Lance and I together, knowing that we're not going anywhere, that we will always be together, that we are committed to each other, and what a sense of safety and belonging that brings to them, because they were always waiting for the shoe to drop when they were growing up, or just different situations within the family life itself. And so that was so affirming and such a blessing for me to hear this morning as well, because just the gift, it's so mutual, right? They bless us like your own children. They're just a gift, you know? And so, so to be able to hear that from them was just very affirming. And I understood exactly what they meant, because I understand what it's like to feel that you do not have a place to belong, and you're searching and you're hungering for a place to call home and for family life. Right? That's solid. That's just stable.
Take us into that. What's your story there with divorce?
Yeah. Well, my own story with that is I was around the age of 11 when my parents decided to separate and divorce. And I know for myself, it was incredibly crushing when my parents decided to separate and divorce, because they were my world. Everything was revolved around them, which I understand now is very natural and normal for a child. For many years, I lived with the shame of having such a deep need to be seen, to be loved, to be heard, to be delighted in, to be celebrated. I had such this ache inside of my being. And now I understand why it's there. And with their divorce just came such that place of feeling so abandoned and alone in my suffering. And so with my older siblings, I have two older siblings, like 10 and 7 years older. So at that time of my parents' divorce, my sister was getting married and leaving. My brother went off to college. So it just felt like everything was falling apart. Like my foundation was just crumbling and coming out from underneath me. And again, at that age, I was 11, just a little background, in a Catholic grade school. Neither of my parents were Catholic at the time. And at that point, I kept coming home saying, I want to be home Catholic. I want to be Catholic. So by God's grace, I was baptized. At 11, I received Holy Communion. Actually, it's funny. I celebrate just a couple of days ago was my first Holy Communion. I always remember it.
Yeah.
So it's incredible to look back and see what was happening then and what God has done now in my life. But the reality of he was calling me into family when my family was falling apart. But yet at 11 years old, the place of the emotions of not having anyone to process my pain with was the most devastating place, because you're a child and you're left with all this anguish and all this sorrow and these places of hopelessness and these places of longing to belong, which reminds me of I remember we had friends who lived down the way from us, and they were a Catholic family. They had 6 kids, and I loved being at their house. And now I know why I loved being at their house, because I would go there and mom would have snacks out for the kids, and the kids would create these big plays and they just were such a beautiful family. They weren't perfect, but the beauty that I saw resonated so profoundly in my heart. I was like, oh my gosh, I ached for that.
Wow.
I ached so much for it. I can remember in 3rd grade, I was in public school at the time, saying to my teacher, I have 6 brothers and sisters. I never had 6 brothers and sisters, but my heart,
wow.
that speaks to that desire of my heart as a child, right?
No kidding.
Longing for family.
If you can kind of lay out for us how that affected all the teenage years,
Oh, yeah.
What was the impact, even though you weren't aware of the connection? And then what was the impact?
Well, the impact was very deep. I mean, it was so easy for me to believe the lies that were around me in the culture. And without having really a sense of security in who I was, in my identity, and just feeling the absence of my father's presence, feeling the absence of my mother's emotional support, I felt so much anguish inside, and the abandonment was just playing out. So it was so easy for me at that point to probably do what a lot of teenagers do, if you will, but just looking to others to affirm my identity. Also having such an inner vow within myself of I was voted most likely never to get married my senior year of high school.
Whoa.
Yeah, because I was the one in class raising my hand. I was in an all-girls Catholic high school at that point, raising my hand, just being defiant with the sisters in religion class when they would lay out these beautiful reasons of what
Wow.
marriage is about. But
Wow.
but what I'm seeing in my environment, I'm seeing people who are, first of all, are not Catholic, but they're living with people, right? They're not living in the fullness of what they're made for. So I see what's happening around me with my brother, my sister, my own parents. And that's my influence. So that's why I'm raising my hand in class and saying, you know what? I don't believe that. I want the guy to live with me so I can kick him out. That was my mentality.
Right.
So if that helps to give you a good picture of where I was at as an 18-year-old, as a 17, 18-year-old.
You said a couple things that I'd love to dive into a little bit more. I've never heard anybody say it like this, but man, it sure resonated with me. Was you said the shame of having such a deep need.
Yes.
And I was like, oh gosh, I don't even know if people could articulate it to that depth. So can you talk about, 1, what is the need? And then 2, what's the shame? Why are being ashamed? Why were you ashamed of that?
The need was so deep for my parents' love. The need was so deep. I can remember for my father's love, meaning the ache. I can remember just crying myself to sleep at night, longing for my parents to be together, and asking my dad the question, is there a possibility? And always kind of him saying maybe, leaving left with this hope, right?
Wow.
Unfulfilled hope. The need was for my father's love, for my mother's love. It was the need to be close to them, the emotional connection, that secure bond. And it was just so deep inside of me. And the shame, as I got older, it became shame to have these emotional needs, to want to be connected, to want to be seen, heard, known, and loved. And it was coming out sideways in different ways. And it was just, coming into marriage, not knowing there's all this deep trauma inside of me that was unresolved, and carrying the shame, carrying the abandonment into marriage, and clinging to, well, if I just go to mass all the time, if I pray all my rosaries and do my devotionals, I'll be nothing like my family.
Wow.
But then to be smacked in the face of, like, as hard as I'm trying to run from being like them, I'm encountering, I'm just like them.
Hmm.
Everything I didn't like about them, I felt I myself was wrestling with and becoming like them, if you will. And so it was just the hopelessness that I felt as these wounds started erupting. And part of the eruption was coming face to face with John Paul's theology of the body, this incredible vision, right? And I'm hitting up against all these wounds. And well, here's this great vision. I want to be able to live into this. And then not coming from a stable home life and feeling the shame of not coming from a stable home life. Because I don't come from that, I start to compare and despair with people who do. So therefore, I'll never live into that vision.
Mm-hmm.
Not understanding that, nobody lives into that on this side of heaven. It's just this beautiful, we're all shooting for that. We're all walking into it, we're journeying into this theology of the body, the gift of human person, human love. But it's like, so just that is what started erupting in my marriage. And I started questioning, so what's so wrong with divorce? Right.
Mm.
Because I saw it in my family life and I didn't realize this was laying in the back of my head. And all of this pain was coming up because it was unresolved grief. The sorrow, what was beneath all the anger, was so much grief where I hadn't grieved the loss of my mom and my dad.
I remember in some psychology class, it all just starts to go together at some point. There was this study that they did with children and playgrounds. In one group, they had a fence. And when the fence was there, they watched the kids play. And in the other group, they had no fence. In other words, there was no structure in which to play. And the thing is the kids who had the fence actually were more free in their play than the kids who didn't have the fence. And I was reminded of that when you were describing the family down the road and your experience. And it's not a fence to keep you in. It's like a structure to hold you.
Yes.
It's like, you're okay in this space. When you're in this space, everything's fine. And I'm hearing you go, I didn't have a space where I knew I was okay. And so all my ache and longing didn't have a space to be worked out or be brought to. So it just increased in intensity, and then the anxiety and fear around it. And then you started going, whoa, this is intense. How am I going to manage this? And then vows start kicking in and taking the ache to other places and people. And I'm like, man, the power of a family to just settle and give space for that deep, deep stuff that's in everybody's heart. Bob, what was resonating with you?
Yeah, I'm just walking with Nicole in the story, both in my own experience, but also as I've walked with her and Lance. And so that's really what's going on inside of me as I'm just walking through that whole history with her.
Some of our listeners will resonate exactly with what you're going through. And probably some will go, oh my gosh, I've never been able to put words to this turmoil that you had and are expressing. Two kind of zones I'm curious about. One zone is, what was it like from 0 to 11? Because my hunch is your parents' marriage wasn't like it was thriving and then it hit a cliff and dropped straight off. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then you're saying you're going through high school. And what happens later on when Lance comes into the picture? And then the part later, which is really what did the Lord start to do? So can you tell us what happened before the divorce? Was there stuff going on there that was still tough, or did it surprise you?
Before the divorce, there was definitely, it was like waiting for the shoe to drop.
Okay.
Is what started to happen. I think at 9 and 10, there were things I shouldn't have been told that were to remain between my mother and my father. So there was a crossing of boundaries, right? As a child, when one parent begins to tell me something about my father, whether it's true or not, was not something for me to ever know. Not for this young heart to have ever had to have heard.
Yeah.
Because it made such an impact on my ability to relate to my father as I grew older. So it was like awaiting. But when it happened, at least put it this way, I don't have a recollection of anyone sitting down and saying, this is what mom and dad are thinking about. This is what's going to be happening. We love you. This has, just sitting down and walking me through it. And sitting down afterwards and walking me through it, it was as if they both were so caught up in their own internal turmoil and their inability to be able to parent me at that point. And I can remember my mom saying to me at one point in my life, she goes, I remember at about age 13, she's like, I just stopped mothering you.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. So you're kind of left with these moments, these gaps in my life, if you will. And really, how faithful is the Father to us? How faithful is He? He gives us what we need. And I mean, I can sit here now and be amazed at everything that He has done. I can see how God has been reconciling and bringing order to my family history through the years.
There's probably listeners who are like, okay, stop talking about the bad stuff. Tell me about that. Like,
right.
So let's get there sooner rather than later. So can you fill in the story now with what was it like? You know, you're at the tail end of high school. When did you meet Lance? How did all of this stuff come out? The impact of your parents' divorce and the impact on you, how did that start to come out in your marriage?
Well, yeah, it started to come out in my marriage because I'm finally in a place of security and safety where I have a place of belonging, but it was hard for me to settle into belonging, and it was hard for me to settle into rest with my husband and to know he wasn't going anywhere. I mean, that was unfathomable somewhere in the back of my mind that he wasn't really going anywhere, but he wasn't, right? So because of that, these things started coming up. And like I said, when I started diving into John Paul's writings and just all these other things and reading the beauty and the goodness of marriage, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what my heart's made for. It's speaking to everything I always longed and wanted. And how do I get there? And then all of this stuff just starting to erupt and encountering the trauma, encountering it and not having words for it, not knowing what to do with it. And honestly, that's where my path crossed with Bob at the time when we were in Steubenville on prayer team. And yeah, I mean, that's when things started just kind of going a little sideways. And I was aching to know the truth, but not knowing where to go with it. So the Lord at that point brought Bob into my life, really. And through Bob came Jim and Lois, who were my spiritual parents as well. The Lord brought Bishop into our life, Bishop Sam, who really helped Lance on the journey with me, helped Lance to really dig in deep, because Lance's perseverance, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be who I am without his faithfulness and his willingness to walk it through with me. The Lord started putting people into my life, and then the therapy piece into my life to start really entering into, because of what I've come to understand so deeply. If you don't have love, enough love to give you the security you need, can you enter the pain? Could I enter into the pain of these deep places that God was calling me into to start healing and restoring and renewing? And it started coming through the people, and also even came through each of my pregnancies as well. You know, just the healing started to begin. Bob, do you have anything to add there? Because I feel like you have a piece to say too when you were there with me watching, kind of when we came to you in such despair.
Yeah, it was like both of you at that point where I don't know if it's going to work. It's just, we're not going to make it because of what I had walked through and facing these places in my heart and getting on the other side of it. I was able to be an encouragement to both of you and say, you can do this, you can make this. But it wasn't quick and it wasn't easy.
No.
And all the pain had to come up. You know, Lance's healing also, which he wasn't from a divorced family, but his own healing. And then I can just remember many times with being with you and Jim and Lois, and you were in Lois's arms.
Yeah.
And you were wailing from the depths of your being, the pain of the abandonment and the separation and the hopelessness, and over and over and over. And yet watching in that, your heart begin to feel secure, to begin to feel hope, begin to feel loved and believe that you're loved and know what love looks like, and to be able to see a married couple and Jim and Lois love each other imperfectly but beautifully and together. You know, that was one of the things that was beautiful, watching Jim and Lois, who were very close friends of mine also, and just watching them love on you and love on Lance. And you became a daughter to them in such a real way. And so much of the healing took place just in those. You'd come up and visit.
Yes.
From Melbourne up to Tallahassee and spend several days with them. And, I would interact with the two of you then, but it was mostly living with them in those time frames that really made a difference from my perception.
That's an intimate scene I have in my head now of, Nicole, you're acknowledging the pain. It's almost like, and I know that in my own life, I can't deny it anymore. Something's not right. And all of the ways that, everybody kind of has their own ways of coping that's often very unhealthy, that we go to these places and ways to deal with the pain. And I've heard it many times, like, why do I keep doing this? Whatever the addiction or the idol or whatever it is. And the answer is what you just said. There's pain that's there. That's unresolved pain. There's unresolved wounds. Things happened that should not have happened. That affects us. And if we don't address that, it will continue to manifest, erupt. The stuff under the surface comes to the surface and changes and affects things. So that's an important piece just to acknowledge. But I have this picture in my head. You're however old, maybe in your 20s or something, and you've met this couple, and you're sitting on a couch, and this kind, loving mother is holding you. I can see it in my 17-year-old daughter. She'll lean into Heather all the time watching a movie. And I'm like, okay, that's what normal looks like. You didn't get that. And because you didn't get that, all this stuff had to get shoved down to cope. And now that you're starting to get it, it's like all that stuff's starting to come out. It's like, what happens when you have an outlet that has too much behind it trying to get out? It comes out fast and in force. That's called pressure. That's just a basic, and that works emotionally. Put your thumb over a hose, the water comes out stronger because there's stuff that's not getting out at its normal pace. Mm-hmm. Can you just touch on that for a moment? I want to respect and honor your story there, and don't want to go to places that are probably maybe just for you and Lance and Jim and Lois. Is that right? Is that their name? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess why I'm wanting to zoom in there for a second is to almost give people a picture, give them permission. Is it okay to go to these places that I imagine you felt like, I haven't felt this bad, but good at the same time? And will it ever stop? Will I ever stop crying? What will Lois leave me? Those to me are all the natural, normal reactions in that moment. Can you bring us into that scene for a moment so that maybe other people can be there with you?
Sure. And just to clarify, it wasn't just like one interaction with Lois of me, having one cry. It was over time, right? Over the years, actually. And within that time, though, with Lois in particular, that is exactly, you hit the nail on the head in the very beginning of how long will this last? Mm. How long will they be there? How long will she be there? Because there still was that space of my heart of abandonment, right? That was unsure if I'd be left in the pain. So, but yes, to be able to rest, to experience the tears and the grief finally coming out, and the relief of that, and the joy, and the sense of knowing I'm surrounded by safety, I'm surrounded by love, she loves me, and coming to know over time, she wasn't going anywhere. Jim and Lois were not going anywhere. The Lord had specifically placed them in my life, and he would reassure me that over and over again, even in prayer, that he placed them there to love me in these places and to just walk me through it. Mm. And there was such a deep love in my heart with Lois and with Jim. It was just so simple to be with them. And so over time, the relationship matured and grew and became more mutual, Yeah. It's like kids. They need that period of time like I did. It's like I was a child. It's like Lois said to me, when you came to the door, the first time I saw you, you were a little girl. I saw you become a teenager and then walk into becoming a young woman. Wow. So she saw the transformation because she saw the little girl part of my heart that hadn't been seen and known and loved. I had all those parts, my little girl, these young pieces of me, my teenage part that needed to be loved. And Lois did that just by her presence sometimes without even words.
This is what I know we want to get into with spiritual parenting, because it's something I just want to touch on it for a moment, because there might be a person out there listening right now and they're like, I don't know what to do. I no longer work, or I'm an empty nester now. What do I do? And I say, if you have love to give, there are so many people, and I was one of those people who received from a generous heart. It wasn't financial. It was simply presence and exactly what you're saying. So I know being the beneficiary of that. So, and often I think people unfortunately go, oh, the answer is advice. I'm going to sit Nicole down or Jake down and I'm going to tell them what they need. And I don't know about you, Nicole, but for me, that didn't work. And in some cases would make it worse, because the message I got was, you don't think I'm either safe enough or I'm so messed up you can't get close. Or on the flip side, you don't know what to do. And so I can't trust you and receive from you. And ironically, it's quite simple. But anyway, I'm jumping into the future series we're going to do on spiritual parents and spiritual children and the power of that. But it's such a beautiful scene that you're setting. And what I love about what you said, Nicole, is it was over time, and getting what you didn't get was healing. I used to say, when I would teach grad classes on counseling, just basic counseling, I said, you can go so far being a therapist by playing the opposite game with your clients. Whatever they got that they shouldn't have, try to offer the opposite. It's pretty simple. Like, so if they got abandonment, offer presence. If they got criticism, offer blessing. That usually takes you some places, Does that resonate, Nicole? It's true.
Oh, absolutely.
I would add to what you're sharing, Nicole, about the spiritual parenting, that you also observed what married love looked like.
Yes.
And the security of that. Can you share a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. Wow. Just being with Jim and Lois was so restorative and healing. Just being in their presence together, watching them love one another. It wasn't perfect, but it was so beautiful. It just was so beautiful. It was everything I didn't experience growing up that my heart desperately needed. The reality to just actually come and have some time with them in their home made such a huge difference in my life. And having incredible conversations around the dinner table, we'd have lunch and we'd have hours of conversation, just laughing and normal life activities, normal family things, healthy, normal things I didn't experience. And that in itself was restoration and healing. And it gave me a picture of, this is what it feels like. This is what it looks like to be family. Wow. And literally from Jim and Lois have I learned how to mother, and Lance and I how to father through them. And now when we have our kids here and we do all kinds of different things, it's like, these are these normal things, these conversations we have, times of prayer with them, laughing, playing games, like, oh my gosh, this is family life. Being in the mess, but being in the joy.
Jim had a laugh like nobody else.
Yeah.
And he was a great storyteller. Both of them passed away in the last couple of years.
Yes. I
would be around those dinner tables and Jim would start to tell a story that he may have told before or he had never told before. And he'd start laughing in the middle of it. And you couldn't wait to hear the rest of the story because he had already been amused by it. And it wasn't just the tears, it was the joy.
Yes.
Of love and communion and of sharing hearts and having a meal together. Lois was awesome at preparing a meal and just welcoming people around the table.
Nicole, what you're saying is I am so glad this is being said, and I want to turn up the volume and shout it from the rooftops. Healing involves getting the good, normal stuff you didn't get.
Yeah.
Amen.
I'm assuming Jim and Lois did not have a doctorate in psychology. They were good-hearted, loving people, and love is what heals.
Yes.
So the recipe, and we're going to get to maybe some of the surgical precision stuff that came with therapy and whatever, but what I love about what you're saying, Nicole, is the baseline was just getting normal stuff, normal love, the stuff we all take for granted in a quote-unquote healthy, normal family. That, I loved how you said it. It got you secure enough to where you could actually address the pain and really seems like go deeper. Am I saying that right?
Absolutely.
Let me add another piece too. The thing that I think was really incredible about Nicole was not only her studying the truth of what the church teaches about marriage and family, but her time in prayer and adoration. Like to this day, adoration, it wasn't just mediated through Jim and Lois. It was heart to heart with Jesus, heart to heart with Mary and Joseph. And so I think that's a big piece of the healing during that whole season up until today that's been really critical.
Wow. Can you talk to us about that, Nicole? Because I'm hearing three things: normal family life, intimacy with Jesus, and some surgical precision in a therapeutic setting. Those seem key to the healing. And also the fourth maybe is Lance's own healing journey, but Lance isn't here, so we'll acknowledge that and set that to the side. Tell us about adoration and why in the world would you be into that based on your story? It doesn't make sense, right? You'd think, I hate you, God. You did this to me. Like, what's happening?
Well, yeah. I mean, just the reality of adoration just became a place of peace, a place of rest for me. For me personally, because I am more of a quiet introvert. So it's just the place where my heart connects with the Lord. And I would take the things I was reading into adoration. And as I was entering into therapy and healing prayer experiences, learning how to dialogue with the Lord, learning to identify what lies were, learning to identify vows, and starting to pray and ask Jesus to come into those moments of my memories, the things that would start to come up from childhood, and invite him there in those lonely places and encounter his love there. So it's really a combination of everything. I don't think it's one without the other. For me, it's not one without the other. To me, the Lord works through the sacraments. He works through people, incarnation, right? Being in the flesh, and therapy. All of that, he's a part of that. As long as my heart's open to receive Jesus there, does he come in and does he move through all those places, right? So yes, with Lois and with Jim, it was just the family dynamics, needing that family love, then learning how to become a family myself, And I can remember the times of receiving the love and the goodness, and then the ache of leaving that, right, for a moment. But then seeing the growth start to happen of when I did leave, joy was going with me. And it was no longer this ache of when will I receive this again? And I would say when I receive that again, because that tells you how deep the ache and the abandonment was, how deep the wound was. Right? And then as that started to heal, it was no longer when will I receive that again? It was more just freedom.
You're giving us like a catechesis on healing. And what I love is how from my perspective, if I put on my professional hat, I would say this is the proper definition of healing. Like, Bob, stop me if I'm going down a wrong path here, but I'm like, there's normal stuff, natural stuff, family, just we had a meal together. We sat on a couch together. We played a game together. That was healing. Yes. There was intimacy with Jesus that was just your and his relationship. You're also mentioning the sacramental life, which is a critical part of healing. And then you're nuancing, and there was some specific, I call that more of the surgical precision stuff. You're saying, I'm now doing healing prayer. I have a memory. And maybe that memory is present when you're on the couch with Jim and Lois. Maybe it's not, but in prayer, maybe, or another time, a memory comes up. And then you're specifically, precisely going into that memory and doing things in that memory with maybe lies and beliefs and vows and judgments and all of that kind of stuff. And the Lord is deeply present in that. And then it sounds like some specific accompaniers who are maybe a bit more trained than, say, Lois or Jim, but all of those are combining together for your journey.
Jim and Lois were also trained to pray.
Okay. So, yeah. So they could kind of do both of those categories in a sense.
True. Very true.
Internally, Nicole, I was like, is Nicole dodging the adoration question? And then I was like, no, I know Nicole well enough to know that I think, Nicole, for you, it's so normal.
Yes.
Your prayer life is so normal that people are going like, what? I just bring it to adoration. Like, and I can imagine, I've literally seen you do this because we've been in person where you're just with Jesus. And a guy like me is like, what's the book say? Where's the instruction manual? What's the next step? And it's right out of the catechism. Like, he looks at me and I look at him and stuff happens there. So I think for some people like, but what do I do in adoration? Like, what's the step? Give me the secret bullet. And I'm hearing you say, Nicole, be there. That's the secret bullet. Would you add more or nuance that any different?
I would say absolutely yes to that. I would say if someone needs a little bullet point and they need a little notebook, that's when you take Healing the Whole Person notebook in there.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
With all of those little steps.
Yes.
And it's right there. You know, if someone literally needs that. But for myself, I did need that at one point.
Nice.
I have those steps, but over time, it's natural. It's normal. It's like the air you breathe. And for me, at this point in my life, just being with Jesus is enough.
I want to jump ahead here a little bit and talk about the healing in your marriage and the healing with your family.
Okay.
And how that came about, because it's so many beautiful stories that I'm aware of that I want people to hear.
Sure. Absolutely.
So just kind of quickly, the healing with you and Lance and how, I know it hasn't been quick at all, but just kind of a quick summary of that healing and where you are today.
Yeah, where we are today. So I'll tell you, I think I mentioned this before. If it weren't for Lance being open to all the therapy, right, to the people who came into my life, our life together, him being willing to go on the journey with me, I mean, his love, his steadfastness, his hours of prayer, I wouldn't be where I am right today. So, and with that said, just between Lance and I now, it's so hard to even put words to it because it's so good. It's healthy. It's normal. It's like, and everyone's like, well, how did you get there? But I'm telling you how I got there. Mm-hmm. It's all of these individuals who are part of my journey in my life helped to bring me where I am. And that healing, that restorativeness within my own heart, understanding who I am, being able to love these other parts of myself enables me to love Lance so much more freely. I'm not looking to him to fulfill needs that aren't his to fulfill. Wow. So it's like there's just more of the freedom there. Now, we're not perfect at this. We're both still imperfect people, but it's just, there's just a lot more rest. I can rest with him now. I know he's not going anywhere. I know we're secure. That is night and day from where I was.
And now your love is together, is side by side being poured out into spiritual children and to others, and to ministering to women. And
absolutely.
There's a nuance I just want to highlight, because I'm imagining you early marriage and later marriage.
Yes.
So early marriage is you're sitting there, and my hunch is your life has taught you people leave and bad things happen. Don't trust. And it's not like you're sitting there going, don't trust Lance, don't trust Lance. It's you can't help it. It's your lens. It's what was.
Yes.
And so how does that impact a marriage? Well, it's pretty clear. Like every little action, you're questioning motive, you're questioning outcome. Is this legit? Did he really mean that? I can just hear all of that. And when that stuff is settled, Lance can maybe go out to the grocery store and get milk, and our hearts in those spaces don't go, why is this happening? What's he really doing? He said he's getting milk, but I don't know. And, when all those movements and dynamics are at peace, and then Lance comes back and you're like, hey, instead of what were you doing? Like that experience for the other is radically different. I'm projecting onto you. I don't know if that was your story. Those are more of my stories. But So then you fast forward, and I get it when you say peace, because it's like you're not always in a place of threat.
Right.
Am I okay? Is this going to be okay? So when that gets settled because of experiences, healing, prayer, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It clicks now. The penny starts to make the drop. Oh, Nicole's story could be my story. And that's really what I'm trying to say to everybody listening. Nicole is normal. Her story can be your story in its unique manifestation expression. But Bob, you allude to something of family. Like what? That's like a big what? What happened there? Nicole, what happened?
So this is incredible. The last week of my mother's life, I had the privilege to be with her as she was dying. And just the gift of my father's presence. He would come and be there every day by her side.
Wow.
So mind you, my dad is remarried.
Okay.
I have a younger half brother. But the point, he would come and be present. And he would just pray quietly. He never said anything. So what was so incredible was we thought my mom was waiting for my brother to say his goodbyes when he came in. But she wasn't. We realized she was waiting for my dad to say it was okay to go.
Oh, wow.
So this is what's incredible. So my father, we told him, he came back and he started sharing with her, let her know it was okay to go home to the Father. Wow. And so within several hours, she started transition from this life to the next. And it was profound. So I'm watching all this take place in front of me, and the Lord is he's rewriting the end of their story. Wow. He's rewriting the end of that whole chapter between the two of them with his mercy and restoration. It's just incredible. And so I'm witnessing this. And those last hours was profoundly healing, because I leaned over to my mother at that point and I put my hand on her womb and I said in her ear, I said, Lord, I praise you for the gift of my mother's womb. I said, Mom, thank you for the gift of receiving me. Thank you for carrying me 9 months in your womb. Thank you for giving me life. And I started praising the Father at that moment. And then a few minutes later, my dad is standing there, my brother and my sister around her bed. And he said to her, he said her name. He said, it's okay to go home. You're surrounded by love. You're surrounded by your family. We love you. And you can go home. And she breathed her last 2 breaths.
Oh my.
I mean,
Whoa.
Talk about redemption. I would have never imagined that the Father would rewrite the end of their story that way. Like with his final word of love, his final word of mercy.
Wow.
I mean, my life from that moment was on a different trajectory.
Yes.
It was so healing and restorative in that moment. And that moment, after my mom passing, it brought up a new layer of healing that I went into that was just incredible.
Wow.
Because I'm mourning the loss of my mother, and I'm mourning multiple things, the things I never received from Mom, right? Mm-hmm. But my prayer was, with my father, I would have a different experience, right? And so the Lord has been redeeming and restoring my level of intimacy with my dad now, that it's incredible. Like I love my father for who he is, and there's no longer the judgment, the anger, the hatred. I had so much of that in my heart with both of my parents, towards both of them. And that's not there anymore. Like the freedom that is there, the freedom to call my father and see him and know I just love him for who he is. It's no longer about what he couldn't give me or what he wasn't for me. Same with my mother. Now it's like, this is my father and I love him. And God the Father has fathered me through particular fathers in my life. And Mother Mary's mothered me through these women, through Lois and through one other woman who's a foundress of an order. But like, it's like, he gives us what we need. It's just, are we asking? And I was asking. I was relentless. I was relentless in asking. Even when I went sideways, the Lord brought me back. And I was like, Lord, please. And he's so merciful. He's so merciful.
Yeah. And the healing with your dad is just in this last year at a new level.
Yes.
And therapy has been a big part of it, working on the parts of yourself. And what I've noticed is you don't need your dad, because I went through this myself. You don't need your dad to be something for you anymore, to fill the gaps, just like you didn't need Lance anymore to fill the gaps.
Correct.
Because the Lord was filling him. And then you could just be with your dad and accept him for who he is and love him for who he is. And it's just such a joy.
Wow. Nicole, this is like, there's so many beautiful highlights, and we know we're going to have you back. And so listeners, if you're like, but what about this section? What about this section? So what I'll say is tune back in when we do our series on spiritual children and spiritual parents, and we'll get to hear more of Nicole and Lance's story in that regard. So thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your yes. I heard this about you before I met you, and then I've seen it to be true. A mutual friend of the three of ours said, if I ever want somebody to actually support me in prayer, there are a few people who are on that list who will actually do it. And Nicole is on that list. And it was one of the biggest, I was like, whoa, okay. It spoke to your commitment to the Lord and relationship. So I just share that with you to bless you that you've been a great support to a lot of people who kind of stand in the spiritual gaps, and you're there with them. So thank you on their behalf for all that you've done for them as well.
Before we end, just share a little bit about Undone and where people can come hear you speak.
Oh, sure. Well, yes, you can check out on the website, JP2 Healing Center's website, where we will be next. We will be in Ohio next. But yes, Undone. It's Freedom for the Feminine Heart. It's a beautiful 3-day conference for women from 18 to 80. All are welcome. So it's just a beautiful time of coming to understand who you are and your identity as a daughter, sister, bride, and mother, and living into that more deeply, and coming to understand the beauty of Eve and of Mary, of where we've been, the fall, and where we're going, and what we're destined and created for. It's a beautiful 3 days of restoration, healing, and coming to just know who you are more profoundly. It's every time I go, I'm blessed by it. So I receive more.
And if people can't go in person, they can.
Yeah, they can go online and live stream it.
Yeah, and you tell a lot of your story through the conference also.
I do share my story as well.
Great having you on, Nicole.
Such a gift.
Thank you. This was a joy to my heart and an honor. So thank you both for receiving me.
Oh, you're welcome. And listeners, we know that this blessed you. And again, we'll have all the links that in the show notes, that especially with regard to Undone. So all the women out there can look and see when it's coming close to them, and they can attend. And again, Nicole, thank you. All our best to Lance. We love him as well. We'll chat with you guys again soon when we do that upcoming series. So listeners, we hope this blessed you, and we will talk to you again soon.